Dame Dash, a symbol, not a man. What the $100 sale actually reveals about power, ownership, and code enforcement. For over 20 years, Damon Dash has not been treated like a regular businessman. He's been treated more akin to a symbol. Originally, Dame Dash symbolized unapologetic ownership. He was one of the first public figures in hip-hop to aggressively preach independence from white-controlled music capital. He embodied the anti-industry archetype: confrontational, visible, morally rigid, and unwilling to soften his critique for institutional comfort. Once a symbol like that cracks, people don't analyze it, they ritualistically punish it. And that's why commentary surrounding the sale of his filmmaking company sounds so unserious. Just start another company. Just do a Netflix documentary. He'll blame Jay-Z. He's a fool. He's given up. But none of these statements even come close to engaging reality. They engage a mythical straw man version of Dame Dash, not the material conditions of debt, courts, taxes, and time. This $100 sale is not the story that people think it is. The headline framing filmmaking company sold for $100, it's already doing the psychological work. People read it as proof that Dame Dash fell off, that he was bad with money, that he was really never a boss in the first place. And all this functions as a shaming mechanism, not an explanation. What gets lost immediately is the basic truth of corporate reality. Corporate shells, IP entities, and operating companies are not interchangeable. In distress situations, the entity itself is often worthless while the ideas, relationships, and future output are not. Selling an entity is not the same thing as selling a legacy. And ironically, the commenters who said he bought the name, not the movies, were closer to the truth than the ones laughing. Dame Dash was never a personality. Before the mythology, there was Rockefeller Records. Dame Dash was not a mascot. He was a co-founder, a capital organizer, and a street-level negotiator who understood leverage way before the powership of ownership became fashionable. Founded in 1994 with Jay-Z and Kareem Biggs Burke, Rockefeller's early success wasn't just cultural, it was structural. They secured independent distribution deals, first with Priority Records for Reasonable Doubt, and then a landmark deal with Def Jam that allowed them to retain ownership. They maintained aggressive ownership claims, and then they openly refused to accept traditional gatekeeping. When major labels passed on Jay-Z's debut, Dame and Biggs helped fund and distribute Reasonable Doubt independently before leveraging its success into a distribution deal that preserved their equity. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. They understood that ownership without distribution was worthless, and distribution without ownership was exploitation. This posture is what made the symbol. It's also what made the eventual break inevitable. The Jay-Z orbit and why it's inevitable. Any discussion of Dame Dash is immediately pulled into orbit around Jay-Z, and that's not accidental. Jay-Z represents institutional fluency, strategic silence, capital integration, and long game positioning. Dame Dash represents confrontational moral ownership arguments, anti-institutional rhetoric, and personal visibility. History rewarded one model and punished the other, not because one was more smarter or righteous, but because institutions reward compatibility with capitalism. Capital doesn't punish those because it's allowed. Capital punishes those who are unpredictable. And in 2004, Rockefeller Records was sold to Def Jam for approximately $10 million, with Jay-Z becoming the president of Def Jam as part of the deal. Dame Dash walked away with his share, but also walked away from the institutional infrastructure that would later insulate Jay-Z from the kind of financial pressure that Dame would eventually receive. Jay-Z went on to build Roc Nation, launched in 2008, invest in companies like Uber, acquire Tidal, and create a portfolio protected by corporate structures, legal teams, and institutional relationships. Dame continued to pursue independence through various ventures, Dame and Dash Studios, DD 172, Poppington, and others, but remained personally visible and legally exposed. That doesn't make Dame Dash stupid, though, necessarily. It just makes him structurally misaligned within the apparatus of American capitalism. The quiet villain, debt. And here's the part that people don't like to confront. You can be right, you can be a visionary, you can be early, and you could still be financially cornered. Debt collapses optionality. Debt forces liquidation, and that turns philosophy into paperwork. Dame Dash has faced multiple legal and financial battles over the past 2 decades. A $7 million judgment to director Josh Weber over a 2015 film dispute. Over $8 million owed to the IRS in back taxes, reported in 2019. A $50 million copyright lawsuit from filmmaker and producer Josh Weber and Muddy Waters Pictures. Child support battles exceeding $400,000. And various creator claims that resulted in asset seizures, including attempted auctions of his Rockefeller shares. And once debt enters the picture, narratives about pride and independence and all that just become bullshit. They become irrelevant. The system doesn't care about your past wins. It cares about balance sheets and court orders. And that's not moral failure. That's capitalism functioning exactly how it's designed. Independence without insulation is fragile. Ownership is not binary. It exists on a spectrum of insulation. And true insulation requires an asset strategy, legal buffering, jurisdictional planning, silence at the right moments, and distance between the person and the paper. Dame Dash's independence was visible, personal, and moralized. And that's what made it powerful culturally, but fragile structurally. Because once system enforcement enters the picture, the system doesn't argue with philosophy. It enforces compliance through courts, liens, seizures, deadlines, and exhaustion. And that's how optionality collapses, not in one dramatic failure, but in 1,000 forced decisions. The shell game, family structures and asset protection, or the attempt at it. Now, this is where the conversation gets many because people accuse Dame of hiding money in his family's name. And they're not entirely wrong, but they're not misunderstanding what it actually means or why it happens. When creditors come after you, they can seize assets titled in your name. Bank accounts, real estate, business interests, intellectual property. If it's got your signature on it, then it's vulnerable. So people with legal and financial exposure try to create distance between themselves and their assets. And what Dame Dash done? Dame Dash, according to court documents and creditor complaints, has allegedly structured various business entities and assets through family members, particularly his children and their mothers. That isn't unusual. That's actually standard practice for people trying to protect assets from judgments. The problem is its execution and its timing. Raquel Dash and Poppington. Poppington, one of Dame's clothing and lifestyle brands, was reportedly structured with involvement from Raquel Dash, his ex-wife, and the mother of his son, Boogie. Court filings from creditors have alleged that assets were transferred to entities where Raquel had ownership interests, making them harder to attach judgments to Dame personally. Dame Dash Studios in DD 172. These entities appear to have been structured as separate corporate vehicles, potentially with family members holding interest. The $100 sale that sparked this whole conversation involved one of these production entities. The buyer acquired the corporate shell, the legal entity with its debts and obligations, but not necessarily the ongoing creative output and future projects that Dame Dash could launch under different structures. His children as beneficiaries. There have been allegations in legal proceedings that Dame Dash has attempted to place assets in trusts or entities benefiting his children. This is actually a legitimate estate planning and asset protection strategy, and when done properly in advance of legal judgments. The problem is that courts can pierce the veil if they determine that transfers were made specifically to evade creditors, which is called fraudulent conveyance. Why this matters. The average person hears he hid money in his family's name and thinks it's honorable. But here's the reality. Every wealthy person does some version of this. The difference is sophistication, timing, and legal cover. Jay-Z's wealth isn't sitting in a checking account under Sean Carter. It's structured through trusts, family offices, holding companies, and nested LLCs that create layers of legal protection. When you're wealthy enough, you have estate planners and asset protection attorneys who build these structures before trouble arrives. You do it proactively, not reactively. Dame's problem wasn't that he tried to use his family structures. His problem was more or less visibility. He did it while being publicly confrontational and visible, while telling everyone that they're dumb and they're slaves for working jobs, which, kind of made him a target for scrutiny. The timing was pretty poor. Many of these structures appear to have been created or utilized after legal judgments began piling up, which courts view as fraudulent conveyance. And then we have sophistication. Without elite legal infrastructure, these structures can be easily pierced by aggressive creditors with resources. And then we have documentation. Proper asset protection requires meticulous documentation providing legitimate business purpose, arm's length transactions, and timing that predates legal exposure. What courts actually do. When creditors suspect that assets have been hidden, they file motions to pierce the corporate veil or challenge transfers as fraudulent conveyances. They depose the debtor, subpoena bank records, trace money flows, and examine whether family members are legitimately operating businesses or just holding assets as nominees. In Dame's case, creditors like Josh Weber have successfully argued in court that certain entities were alter egos, meaning they existed on paper but were functionally controlled by Dame, making them subject to seizure despite this family structuring. And the deeper truths. Using family structures for asset protection isn't inherently illegal or immoral. It's what every competent wealth advisor recommends. The difference between smart planning and hiding assets comes down to, did you do it before or after you knew about the debt? Can you prove legitimate business purpose? Are the entities truly separate or just paper shields? And do you have legal resources to defend this structure? Dame had the instinct to protect his assets. What he didn't have was the institutional infrastructure to do it in a way that could survive legal challenge. He was trying to build the parachute while he was falling. And that's the brutal reality. Asset protection works when you're rich enough to do it right. When you're fighting from a position of financial distress, every defense move looks more and more like evasion. Now, why are people enjoying this story so much? There's a reason that this story circulates with jokes instead of empathy. Dame Dash made a generation uncomfortable by saying, "You don't own anything. You're working for someone else's dream. You're playing someone else's game. Being liked and being accepted isn't the same thing as being free." And watching him stumble gave people to stop interrogating their own lack of ownership and agency of life, and it made compliance to the system feel safer, makes wage slavery feel inevitable, and reframes the system as fair. If Dame Dash can fail, then maybe the system was never the problem. Maybe he just didn't pull himself up by his bootstraps enough. And therein lies the emotional payoff. The real lesson, and it's uncomfortable, isn't don't be like Dame Dash, or that Jay-Z was smarter, or that loud bosses lose. The real lesson is this: ownership without institutional insulation is fragile. Independence without capital discipline is temporary. Truth without leverage does not protect you. And asset protection only works when built proactively, not reactively. Dame Dash didn't fail because he was delusional. He failed because the system he fought requires submission at specific pressure points: taxes, courts, creditors, and time. Those are not personality flaws. Those are structural realities. Where this conversation actually goes. This conversation isn't really about $100 sale of a filmmaking company. It's about what independence costs when not insulated from code enforcement. Any serious follow-up to the story must address Dame Dash's founding role in Rockefeller. He wasn't just Jay-Z's business partner. He was the operational architect who understood that true independence required both ownership and redistribution. The 1996 deal with Priority Records, followed by the strategic Def Jam partnership, proved that you could negotiate from a position of strength if you had something worth buying. The ideological split up from Jay-Z. This wasn't personal drama, it was a philosophical fork in the road that led to institutional integration. Becoming Def Jam president, building Roc Nation within the systems, and the other path led to permanent oppression. That's multiple independent ventures, constant visibility, and moral inflexibility. Both were coherent strategies, but only one was compatible with how American capitalism protects wealth. The mechanics of asset liquidation. Corporate entities in distress accumulate liabilities that can make them worthless on paper, even if the underlying intellectual property or brand has value. $100 sale often represents strategic amputation, getting rid of a toxic legal entity to preserve future operational capacity. The buyer acquired legal obligations and whatever assets remained. They didn't acquire Dame's creative capacity or future output. The strategic use of family structures and legal insulation. The difference between protected wealth and exposed wealth often comes down to trust, nested corporate entities, jurisdictional planning, and the distance between personal identity and legal liability. Jay-Z operates within this world now. His assets are structured, protected, buffered through entities like Roc Nation Holdings, Sean Carter Enterprises, and various other investment vehicles that create layers between Sean Carter the person and the assets themselves. Dame attempted similar structures, utilizing family members, separate corporate entities, and asset transfers, but did so reactively, visibly, and without the legal sophistication to make them judgment-proof. The results? Courts pierced the veil. Creditors attached their assets anyways, and the protection collapsed. The timing problem. If you set up a trust for your children in 2005 when you're flush with Rockefeller money, that's estate planning. If you do it in 2018 after $7 million judgment, that's fraudulent conveyance. The law cares deeply about sequence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Independence without insulation is a wager against the enforcement apparatus of the United States and Capitol. And that apparatus has unlimited time, unlimited resources, and unlimited patience. Dame Dash had the ideology. He had the vision. He had the courage to be confrontational when everyone else was accommodating. He even had the instinct to protect his assets through structural separation, but he didn't have the sophistication, the timing, or the legal infrastructure to make it work. And when enforcement came, through court judgments, tax liens, creditor claims, and compounding interest, the family structures that were supposed to protect him became evidence of evasion rather than prudent planning. And that's not a morality tale about pride or failure. That's a structural diagram of how power actually works and what happens when you challenge it without the right defense. The system doesn't punish you for protecting your assets. It punishes you for doing it poorly, visibly, and too late.